There is a place you keep returning to, not a physical place, a feeling, a position, a particular way of standing in relation to the world around you, slightly apart, slightly removed, watching from a distance that you didn't always choose but have, over time, come to recognize as yours. You have been in rooms full of people who are laughing at the same things, moving toward the same things, wanting the same things, and felt, not with sadness, but with something stranger, that you were watching a film you hadn't been cast in, not excluded, not rejected, just outside. And you have noticed something about that feeling that surprises you every time. It isn't always uncomfortable. Sometimes there is something in it that feels almost like relief, like taking off something heavy you didn't know you were wearing, like being allowed, finally, to stop performing a version of yourself that never quite fit anyway. And here is what no one talks about. Sometimes outside feels like home. Watch someone who has always felt like an outsider carefully. Not the performance of it, not the cultivated strangeness, not the deliberate distance that some people wear like a costume. Watch the real thing. The person who sits at the edge of every room, not because they were pushed there, but because the edge is where they can see everything. The person who never quite belongs to any single group, who moves between worlds, fluent in several, native to none. The person who, when asked where they are from, or what they do, or who they are, gives an answer that is true, but somehow never complete. These people are not broken. They are not waiting to be fixed by the right community, or the right relationship, or the right set of circumstances. They have simply developed a relationship with outsideness that most people never have to develop, because most people never have to. And in that relationship, something unexpected has grown. For most of human history, belonging was not a preference. It was a requirement. The person outside the group was the person without protection, without resources, without the social infrastructure that made survival possible. Belonging was not comfort. It was necessity. And the fear of not belonging, the deep, visceral dread of exclusion, was one of the most powerful motivating forces the human brain had ever developed. This fear still lives in us, intact, fully operational, running exactly as it was designed. Which is why the experience of outsideness is, for most people, one of the most painful experiences there is. The rejection, the loneliness, the sense of being fundamentally different in a way that cannot be explained or fixed. But here is what the research tells us about people who have lived outside long enough. Something changes. Not the pain doesn't disappear, but the relationship to it shifts. The outsider who survives their outsideness, who moves through it rather than being destroyed by it, develops something that people who have always belonged rarely have to develop. They develop a self that does not depend on the room. Psychologists call it differentiation, the capacity to maintain a stable sense of identity in the presence of social pressure to conform. Most people's sense of self is, to a significant degree, constructed socially. It is built from reflection, from the way others see them, respond to them, include them. Remove the social scaffolding, and the self becomes uncertain, anxious, in need of reassurance. But a person who has spent significant time outside, who has learned by necessity rather than choice to exist without the scaffolding, builds something different. They build an internal architecture, a sense of self that is anchored not in what the room thinks of them, but in what they know to be true about themselves. This is not always comfortable. It is, in fact, often deeply uncomfortable. The person who has built their identity independently has also, usually, built it alone, in the absence of the mirroring and the belonging that make the process easier for everyone else. There is a grief in that, a specific, quiet grief that the outsider carries, for the ease they watched others have, for the belonging they reached toward and couldn't quite hold, for the versions of themselves they tried on and had to put back down because they never quite fit. That grief is real. It deserves to be named. But the result of surviving it, of building a self without the scaffolding that most people take for granted, is a particular kind of stability. A groundedness that doesn't require constant social maintenance, a self that can walk into any room and remain fundamentally itself. Now here is where it gets strange, because the comfort of feeling like an outsider, the strange peace that certain people find in the margins, is not the same as being comfortable with loneliness. It is something more specific than that. It is the comfort of clarity. When you are outside, you can see the room, you can see the dynamics, the unspoken hierarchies, the performance of belonging that everyone inside is engaged in without quite knowing it. You can see what the group needs to believe about itself and what it cannot afford to examine. You see it because you are not inside it, because you are not invested in maintaining the consensus, because your comfort does not depend on the group remaining intact. This is an uncomfortable position. It is also an extraordinarily valuable one. The outsider sees what the insider cannot, not because the outsider is smarter or more perceptive, but because their position gives them access to a view that belonging, by its very nature, obscures. Think about what belonging requires. It requires investment. It requires a degree of loyalty to the group's narrative about itself. It requires the soft, constant work of maintaining relationships, of not saying the thing that would disturb the peace, of not seeing the thing that would complicate the consensus, of not being so different that your presence becomes a question the group has to answer. Belonging is not free. It costs something. And what it costs, most of the time, is a portion of your clarity. The outsider has paid a different price, a harder price in many ways, but they have kept something that the insider traded away without quite noticing. And the strange comfort they feel in that position, the familiar ease of the edge, is not the comfort of giving up. It is the comfort of seeing clearly. So what does this mean? If you have spent significant parts of your life feeling like an outsider, not by choice, not with pride, but simply as the persistent texture of your experience, then perhaps the question worth sitting with is not how to finally belong. Perhaps the question is what you have learned to see from where you are standing. Because the view from the edge is not a consolation prize. It is a different kind of access, a different kind of knowledge, the kind that only comes from having stood apart long enough to notice what everyone inside has agreed, without discussion, not to look at. Belonging has its own blindness, and the person who has never quite belonged, who has always been, in some fundamental way, outside, carries a kind of sight that the room cannot give you. You are not left out. You are positioned. And the question now is not how to move closer to the center. The question is what you are going to do with the view.